to help all of us understand that sometimes we actually help women tolerate abuse by making bullshit ass excuses for why they should be allowed to let themselves be in these situations in a continued way. What is good, YouTube fam? It's your girl Gracesandra, and I'm here today talking about a very important topic: why black women are putting up with verbal abuse. Let me start off by saying this is not a shame space to shame or practice misogyny towards black women. If you came here to shame black women, you're in the wrong place. That will not be happening. Not at all. No sir, no ma'am. That's why you're here. Go. Hateful comments will be deleted. You heard? Okay, now that we're on the same page, I myself was a victim of very severe verbal abuse. You can watch my stories if you want to figure it out. This is part of a whole entire ass series about what verbal abuse is, using the resource of Patricia Evans' book, The Verbally Abusive Relationship, which taught me literally everything I know, this and her other 5 books. I myself am someone who did not know I was being verbally abused, and I am someone who put up with verbal abuse for way too long before I got out of it, and I am someone who explained it away, rationalized it away, justified it away, and decided I don't want anything to do with that anymore, and I will never again allow any person in my life ever to verbally abuse me. Not ever, not in any way at all. Children, my mother, my sister, my cousins, my aunties, my sister's cousin, baby daddy, my partner, my love, my husband if I ever get married again. No one will practice these behaviors on me, and I don't think that's too much to ask, honestly and truly. That's where I'm coming from. I'm going to talk about why black women put up with verbally abusive relationships. So let's just get right into this video. Let me just say real quick, if you have not watched the other videos in the series about what is verbal abuse, you might want to go check that out just to get a sense of what it is, because it's so much more than just name calling, someone calling you a ratchet ass bitch or whatever. Way bigger than that. It's comprised of 15 different types of communication styles and strategies and toxicity and all manner of things. Name calling is just one. Before we go there, you might want to do that.
Boys later.
Okay, glad you're back. Let's go. So the number one reason why black women put up with verbally abusive relationships is, do you know what it is? I'll give you a second to think about it. What is the number one reason black women put up with verbally abusive relationships? It's conditioning. Conditioning. There's a really famous story about a frog. I'm sure you've heard it. When you put a frog into a cold pot of water and you slowly heat up the temperature, the frog will stay in the water until it boils to death, because it's slowly adapting. Whereas if you put the frog in boiling hot water, it's going to jump out. Part of the reason why is because, like that sweet, helpless, unfortunate frog who got boiled to death, we adapt naturally. That's why we call kids so resilient, because they can be through trauma and still adapt. We also adapt gradually, so we're not inclined to notice very small incremental changes. And that's how most partners adapt to verbal abuse, and that's how I adapted to verbal abuse, because the changes were incremental and slow, and I just kept tolerating and tolerating and tolerating and tolerating until it was out of control. And then by that point I was trauma bonded, and I had complex PTSD, and I was being abused in other ways, specifically narcissistically. He was my whole ass husband, and we had a daughter together, and I didn't want to leave, and I felt like I loved him, and that's how I got boiled to death. But before all of that, for me and for black women in general, is the culture and the society that we grew up in. The only experience I'm going to speak to is black Americans, because that's all I know. I know that the diaspora of black people all over the world experience racism in every conceivable way, but I only can speak to what it's like in America. In America, we as black women are constantly experiencing a level of misogyny that's coming at us from all angles, covert and overt, and I adapt to it so thoroughly that it does not even throw us when someone treats us in a horrible way. Maybe it might, but we might be like, they're having a bad day. Few years. We just start adapting gradually. And it's helpful to point out that that conditioning also helps us interpret our experiences. So for the sake of this video, I'm just going to focus on the reasons why black women are more conditioned to put up with verbal abuse in general. The first reason is because we believe our partner is rational. That was like one of the number one reasons that I gaslit myself for so long when I was with my ex-husband, because I didn't realize that almost nothing he was saying, especially when he was in his anger activated mode and he would be in a verbally abusive rant, and I just assumed my husband is a very smart man. He's rational. He's being rational. And so if he said something that denied me my reality, my thoughts, my motives, thing that was a lie, if he used defining behavior, which is telling a lie to someone about themselves, like if he said,
"You're crazy, you're just too sensitive, this shouldn't hurt you,"
my first thought was like, At a very deep unconscious level, I'm thinking and considering that he's rational. I need to consider, am I being too sensitive? Am I not normal? Am I, something wrong with me for being hurt about such and such thing that he did? That is something that we learn growing up, because a lot of us, especially Black women in America, again, I'm going to clarify because I don't even want to speak for Black Americans because we're not a monolith, but I will say this: it is widely experienced for a lot of Black Americans that we aren't allowed to really experience our emotions when we grow up. Some of us have, and for everyone who was able to, that's wonderful. But for many of us, we weren't allowed to experience our emotions, so we often heard things like, you ain't got nothing to cry about, or like, you keep crying, I'm gonna give you something to cry about. That kind of thing is very, very, very detrimental to us. When someone says to you, either you have nothing to cry about, or if you keep crying, I'm gonna give you something to cry about, the fact of the matter is, it is conditioning us that line of thinking is rational. That line of thinking is not rational. It's not rational to tell someone who's crying, anyone of any age, that if they continue to express their normal, natural human feelings, they might get punished for it, have something taken away, or be hit in some way for crying, which is completely irrational, especially a child. But saying you have nothing to cry about is gaslighting someone, because if someone is crying, if their body is physically crying and they're not faking it, they're producing real emotions, then they have something to cry about, whether you agree with it or not. And when we tell that to children, especially little girls, it conditions us to later in life let men dictate whether or not we have something to cry about. So when my ex would be like,
why are you crying about that? God damn, you so over fucking sensitive
and just verbal vitriol, I was like, maybe he's right. Maybe I don't have something to cry about, even though I would be like gutted in my soul, deep in grief. Letting him tell me I don't have anything to cry about, that's a part of conditioning. So the way that affects us, we learn not to trust our own feelings, and that is a horrible place, especially for Black women, to live in, considering all of the barriers that come our way in terms of just living in society and being at peace with ourselves, being at peace with our hair, our skin, our body, our mind, our drive, our sex drive or our professional drive, our money or our poverty, our straight hair, a wig, natural hair or bald head, super light skin or super dark skin or whatever in the middle. Like, it's not just about our appearance, it's about everything. But if you don't trust your own feelings, the feeling of being beat up by everyone all the time is enormous, number one. And number two, that conditioning teaches us not to trust our feelings when we actually feel like someone is being abusive towards us. And then it also teaches us that verbally abusive behavior is rational, when verbally abusive behavior, if nothing else, is at its peak irrational. Another reason why Black women are conditioned to accept verbal abuse is just because we're women. So this applies to all women, but there is this horrible societal lie that women in general are irrational and men are rational. I'm not going to go into all the reasons why that is fucking ridiculous, but humans are, all of us, rational and irrational at times in our life. Women, we have been conditioned to believe that our emotions are irrational and our thoughts are irrational, and whatever it is about us that men don't like are irrational, and that is absolutely false. So we go into relationships with men, usually in cisgender relationships, assuming, oh well, he's the rational one and I'm the irrational one, when if there is any abuse of anything going on, he is more than irrational. Just remember that. Just remember that shit right there, because that's the pearl. That's the wisdom right there. So what happens is the abuser denies the abusive behavior, right? He'll say, well,
that didn't happen.
Or he'll say,
if it did happen, it's your fault.
And then when he says,
you're the reason for the abuse that I've committed,
the victim might be looking for the rationality and the logic of it and might conclude, oh, well, he's the rational one, so that must be true about me. And if the victim is conditioned from their childhood not to trust their feelings or their intuition, or to believe that abusive behavior like that, gaslighting and defining behavior is rational, then they're going to think, I am the problem. And that leads us to try to find the reason. Maybe it is my fault. I wonder if it's this. I wonder if it's my body. I wonder if I'm not smart enough. I wonder if I don't make enough money. I wonder if I'm too naggy. I wonder if I shouldn't say anything about all the times he cheats on me, because maybe it gets on his nerves. Or there must be some reason why he thinks I'm trying to start an argument, or there must be some reason why he's getting to this. So it causes a lot of confusion, and the victim's belief that her partner is being logical and coming from a rational place produces so much cognitive dissonance. And for me, when I was in the situation with my ex, I lived in confusion so often, and I used to always think, like, what is it? What is it that I'm not explaining? Like, if I just try to explain myself a little better, he won't blame all these conversations on me. If I come at this this from like the most rational, logical way I could possibly come for it, he couldn't be mad. Or if I write this all out in a way that's like perfectly outlined, there's no way he could confuse it. Or if I came to him with no emotions, like I thought, you know, for him, he used to get really frustrated when I would cry, and he thought that I was using that as a way to be manipulative. And for a little while I thought, am I? You know, but it was just like, I am a crier by nature. But so I would come to him with like, make sure you don't cry, like suck it up, so that he wouldn't think I was trying to manipulate him. And even when I sent the emails, the perfectly outlined emails, even when I practiced, I would practice what I was going to say. Even when I said things really briefly, or if I said it in a long way, everything always made him mad anyway. Nothing ever made sense to him, and it was always my fault. There was always a reason why he needed to be that mean to me. And it took me a very, 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 very long time to realize that I was never going to win, that he was committed to not understanding what I was saying, and he was committed to making me the reason that he needed to be abusive. That's a hard part of verbal abuse, is that it leaves you in a state of emotional peril for a really long time, even after you know about it. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're experiencing rational behavior 1 minute and then irrational behavior the next, that going back and forth is what produces the cognitive dissonance and the confusion that might have you trying to look for the rationality of it even more, which is what happened to me. That's what kind of thing that leads to complex PTSD symptoms and different things that actually create stress and cortisol, adrenaline in your body coursing through your body all the time, and that creates complex PTSD. A big part for me of why I was conditioned is because part of the reason that I did not know I was abused, especially being verbally abused, is because I grew up with a verbally abusive brother. I'm talking about knock down, drag out. My brother called me a stupid little nigger. I'm biracial and I grew up in a white household. My mom from her first marriage had white kids, and my white brother became a flaming racist. He was about 8 or 9 years older than me, and he used to call me a stupid little nigger and verbally bash black people in a horrific way, routinely. I could say a lot more about that, but what I'll say is I was used to it. And so when my ex started being verbally abusive, one of the first things he said to me was something that he knew would harm me. It was something that my brother used to say to me, which is, "Are you fucking stupid?" And the thing is I told him too, like, my brother used to ask me. My brother didn't just say like, "You're so fucking stupid." He'd be like, "Are you fucking stupid?" You know, he said it in such a like ridiculous way. But one of the first times my ex ever like went off on me in a real like mean tone, angry, yelling, mean body language, threatening body language kind of thing, that was what he said to me. And the sad part is I had asked him if he really wanted me and the baby, because at that time I didn't know, but he was cheating on me with somebody else, and it was very difficult for him to pretend like he still loved me and wanted me, and he seemed bored as hell, and I was pregnant and he wasn't interested in having sex with me. So it was an honest question. It really was an honest question. We were FaceTiming at the time, and I was like, "Do you still want me and the baby?" And we were FaceTiming, and he like got in the camera and was like,
Are you fucking stupid?
and it really hurt. And you might be like, well, you didn't know you were being verbally abused at that point. The reason why I didn't, he apologized. He said he was sorry. You know, he tried to explain why he felt like he needed to go off on me like that, because he continued to go on. I thought, well, this is how life is. People verbally abuse one another and then they apologize, and it doesn't mean they're an abuser. But honestly, I didn't even get that far. I didn't even let myself think that far ahead. I just accepted it. And it really wasn't until several months went by before I realized I was being abused. That happened in like a February, and when I realized it was being abused, it was November of that year. So it took a lot more instances like that for me to finally be able to say, I gotta face facts. Another thing is, I didn't know what verbal abuse was. I didn't even know that my brother had verbally abused me. I didn't put that together until after I realized that my ex-husband was verbally abusing me. I didn't know what verbal abuse was. No one I knew what verbal abuse was. No one I knew had considered, hey, do you think maybe you're being verbally abused in a very severe way? So it wasn't even something that I had considered. And sometimes when you don't know about something, there's kind of an aura of unknowability, which makes the behavior seem even more realistic and logical. Especially if the abuser is really undermining your experience, it's just easier to accept it or blame yourself. And honestly, for black women, because we're experiencing this so much in culture and in society, in music and movies, you know, we're looking at all these tropes of the angry black women and the baby mama and all this stuff. It's easier for us to go into a place of like, we're accepting more and more abuse, and then our self-doubt is growing and growing and growing. So at the same time that we're accepting more abuse, our self-doubt is growing, and those two together just lead for you to be the frog in the pan that is being heated up and acclimating to this almost intolerable reality. Another reason why black women women may be more susceptible to allow verbal abuse is because we are used to this idea of centering men and their feelings and their emotions and their anger and their sexuality, and centering them in every way, and believing that that's in some ways a little bit of a role for us. And so if a man is acting in a way that's troubling to you, but then also refuses to talk to you about it, that's going to lead to more distress. But the more you push, the more angry he might get. And if you're used to being like, my needs and my communication is not important, then you're going to center his emotions and his reasons. Or if you're scared of him especially, or if you press a conversation and that leads to some other type of abuse, like physical violent abuse, you're not going to press it, and that leads to even more confusion and acceptance of verbally abusive behavior. And then there's some other cliches. I'm just going to go through the cliches quickly, but you'll be able to recognize right away how these cliches lead to women's conditioning. It takes two. Love conquers all. You can rise above it. Just rise above it. Just be glad you got a roof over your head. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. And if you believe that, then as a victim, you might be afraid to say something to your partner, because you might think, well, this is being unkind or disloyal or judgmental. Be nice to people and they'll be nice to you. If you believe that cliche, then you might still be trying to be nice to your abuser even while they're abusing you. And that was me, y'all. That was me. That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to kill him with kindness and it was not working. Take it with a grain of salt. Somebody said that to me one time when I told them about what was happening. And basically what it said to me is, deny your feelings. You might be being abused, but take it with a grain of salt. Keep trying. That was a real common one that evangelical Christians told me, when really they needed to say, get your ass out of there. This marriage is toxic, dysfunctional, and abusive. His bark is worse than his bite. If someone says it to you, or if you believe that yourself, you might be conditioned to stay in a verbally abusive relationship just because he's not hitting you, punching you, pushing you downstairs, clawing you, grabbing at you, biting you, and banging you over the head with pots and pans. As if that's the only way one can be harmed. You might also deny your very real pain at being told constant pathological lies, horrible berating verbal abusive behavior, or any sort of verbally abusive behavior if you think this isn't as bad as it could be. Well, you can't expect too much from a man who, fill in the blank. For me, my ex had been very severely abused growing up, and I knew that. I had empathy for that. I have sympathy for that. I still feel sad about that for him, but I made that a reason why I expected him to be nice to me. People don't always mean what they say, baby girl. That's another advice thing I got, one time when my ex told me he didn't find me attractive while I was pregnant. I was so sad about that. And people would be like, he doesn't mean that. He didn't mean what he says. Of course he finds you attractive. And I was like, but no, he actually told me he doesn't. So I was really hurt. But also I think because he was having an affair anyway, he just didn't care about me at all. But if I had believed that, and honestly I did for a while, I tried not to take what he said seriously. I remember actually even telling him at some point, I was like, yeah, when you get into a mood, I just stop listening, because things that I know you'll tell me later you didn't mean. And that kept me longer, sadly enough. He doesn't know any better. It's just a stage. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, which is not true. That is not true, FYI. Accept others the way they are. Don't try to change them. I agree, don't try to change people, but you ain't gotta accept shitty treatment. Judge not lest you be judged. You create your own reality. Now, in a lot of ways, I believe in manifesting. I believe in creating our own reality. But when you're telling that to an abuse victim in the middle of them being abused, you are insinuating that they are creating an environment in which it is their responsibility for being abused. Don't ever say that to somebody in that situation. But if it's you, please know that you did not create that reality and you need to get out of it so that you can create a new reality for yourself. Nobody said life was easy. If you're believing that nobody said life was easy, BS. Which is also true, but if you're believing that, you might be thinking, well, then I can just keep tolerating this. And finally, the last reason why I believe black women accept verbal abuse more readily, more than anyone else, is because black Americans, we have made a sport of making fun of each other, talking down to each other, saying horrible things to one another in the name of jokes. And this is a very sticky situation, so I was hesitant to even talk about this, because I am not saying don't ever make another joke again at the expense of anyone else. But I just want us as women to be careful how we are allowing other people to talk about us in the name of it being funny, a joke, a community thing, a community drag, or whatever, because we deserve better. We deserve better, especially black women, than to always be the butt at the end of a joke. So I think that another reason that keeps us in a situation where we allow a man in our life to dictate whether or not we are being abused, particularly verbally. Last thing I want to say that this chapter references is that women who are verbally abused come from all backgrounds, everything from high school dropout to PhD, everything from dire poverty to multi-millionaires, everything from varied occupations, from artists to cooks to homemaker to entrepreneur and CEO. The point is that anybody can get roped into and conditioned into being in these kind of relationships, and that no one is stupid or naive or any other horrible thing. And this is not a shame-based position to be in. It's one where if you're in it, and when I was in it and I just had to realize I'm here, I have to radically accept that I'm here, and I have to figure out what I need to do to get out of it. I thought I was smarter than that. I wasn't, and I just need to understand that and figure out what to do to move on. I'm gonna read to you a list that Patricia Evans came up with of all of different partners of verbal abusers, and these are the words that they use to describe themselves: frustrated, responsible, hopeful, empathetic, compassionate, naive, trusting, optimistic, desirous of understanding, tolerant, accommodating, and confused. I would say that I was every single one on this list when I was going through what I was going through. That does make me think of one other reason. This is y'all bonus. y'all number 4 bonus. I remember when I was being verbally abused, there were so many black people in my life telling me, basically, to sum it up, it's not that bad. This shouldn't be that bad. It shouldn't hurt that bad. Even when I was telling people, I got this book. This describes what a verbally relationship is, and he is hitting every single thing on here. And it describes mild, moderate, and severe abuse, and he is in the severe category. He's doing every single one. All 15 of the verbally abusive behaviors, plus the 16th, which is the anger addict, which he was also doing, showing an addiction to anger. And when I was starting to get sick from it, and when I developed acute stress disorder, that was the first thing that happened, because that's when I was pregnant, found out about the other 3 women. Yes, I said 3. Then found out about this. Then was starting to explore whether I was being narcissistically abused. All of that happened within 6 months, and I had a newborn. And I developed acute stress disorder because my body was just breaking down completely. And even then, people were like, well, is it really that bad? And so this video is not just for black women to think, why am I conditioned? Why do I put up with verbal abuse? But also for all of us, to help all of us understand that sometimes we actually help women tolerate abuse by making bullshit ass excuses for why they should be allowed to let themselves be in these situations in a continued way. It's one thing, if you're in it, you're trying to support somebody, but it's another thing once they say things are really fucked up. I am really fucked up inside. My head is fucked up inside. My body is going nuts in a lot of different ways that I'm not used to. And to still have people gaslight you is incredibly painful. And it is why I stayed longer. It is why I stayed longer. People didn't ask enough questions, and they didn't tend to really explore what is verbal abuse. Even then, even when I said I'm being severely verbal abused, people were just like, I'm sure it'll pass, babe. Let's pray about it. And it's one of those situations where when you're in person with someone and you want to be like, it's so much fucking worse than that. It felt awkward to even say that. I didn't even know how to stand up for myself anymore in a situation that even wasn't him, let alone with him. Y'all. So that is why I believe that black women tolerate this. My suggestion is, if you're in this kind of situation, number 1, reach out to me if you want private coaching to get through it. I'm a trauma-informed life coach in a certification process. Number 2, if you just want to talk for an hour, I am now offering hour-long sessions, very inexpensively, $50 an hour. Number three, I host a group for black, indigenous, brown women of color who are experiencing complex PTSD, trauma bonding, verbal abuse, narcissistic abuse, domestic violence, or any kind of trauma. For us to be in community, the link is below. It's called BWB Free, and it's a wonderful community where we share what we're going through and offer support for one another. And don't forget to sign up for my newsletter so you can get more weekly tips and a little bit of a journaling writing space for me that's written just for you, women who are going through this kind of thing. And lastly, ding, buy my book on Amazon. It's a little bit of my story, a lot of my story. Thank you guys for watching so much. I appreciate y'all, and I believe we can get through it. I believe black women can stop putting up with this shit and really, really move on from this. So, love y'all.